I want to address a halachic discussion in regards to the halachot of brachot, which frequently we get asked about what bracha to make on granola, on oat bars, and any of the 5 grains which has gone through a process of cutting up or put together. What bracha do you make on these products? So let's first clarify. 2 of the 7 species which we require to make mezonot and ala mechia on are chita and seora, wheat and barley. Within that family, other grains are inclusive as well, like oats, rye, spelt. They all belong to the family of wheat and barley. So they're also included in the 7 species which a person is required to do mezonot and ala mechia. But the Gemara says that's providing you turned it into a form of a bread. Means you ground the grain, you kneaded it, and then you placed it in an oven or you cooked it in whatever way. You would have to make on it either mezonot or hamotzilach min haaretz, and obviously the after bracha will depend on the first bracha. Whether you made mezonot, it'll be ala mechia. If you made hamotzi, it will be birkat hamazon if you have the sufficient amount to make an after bracha. The problem arises is in between. What happens if we have these 5 grains whole, intact, the way they are naturally? So the Gemara says quite clearly, these remain and retain the blessing of Borei Peri Ha'adama, as like any other vegetable, because you haven't turned it into a form of a pat, of a bread, or of a dish which is all the particles together. You have left it intact. So they will remain Borei Peri Ha'adama. But the issue we'll have is, that's the first bracha. What would we make for an after bracha? So let's take for example sugar puffs, what we call. Sugar puffs, which in the Hebrew they call it shalva. It's actually whole wheat, which you eat. They've been puffed through some kind of a steaming process, but they're intact, they're whole. So the bracha, or you make arisa. People have on Shabbat morning arisa. Arisa is after the process of cooking, the grains are intact, they're whole. They're not sticking to each other. So those retain the blessing of Hadamah. The only issue we have, which is quite a serious issue, is the after bracha. Now here we come, according to the Rif, according to the Al-Fasi, according to the Rambam, it seems to be that the after bracha for this will be Borei Nefashot Rabot. However, the Tosfot says it's one of the 7 species. We should be making a unique bracha of not ala mechia, but at least al ha'adama. But the Tosfot says that there's no such blessing of ala adama val pri adama. So we are stuck. What after bracha would we make on it? So he writes, Rabbanut Tam was one of the great Baalei Tosfot. He writes that in his Sidur, he crossed off and he wrote ala hadama val peri hadama. However, we don't have such a bracha. So the Tosafot says a Yireh Shamayim, a God-fearing person should make sure to eat puffed wheat or to eat these whole grains only in a meal. So therefore you're covered by hamotzi and birkat hamazon either way, so you don't have to worry about the after bracha. However, halacha lema'aseh, if someone did eat puffed wheat more than a kazait, then he would have to make Borei Nefashot Rabot after that, like the Shulchan Aruch's opinion, which he follows the Rambam and the Al-Fasi. Even though he said a God-fearing person should eat it in a meal, but if someone didn't do that, then he would make Nefashot on that. Now we come to the middle category. If you take these grains and you crush them, they're not intact, they're not whole. So obviously if you eat them as they are raw or roasted, then you'd make on it still hadamah. But if in any form of the process they came together and they got bound together, especially with heat, with honey or other sugars, and then they were put together into clusters or into bars, then since the oats or the 5 grains are rolled or not intact or not whole, have been pressed, squashed, or not in its original form, and they've come together, then it would get the bracha of Borei Minei Mezonot. And after that, if you had a kazait, you'd make ala mechia. Because since the grains are not intact, they've been broken up, or they've been pressed, so they're not in its original form, and they've been put together, so therefore you'd make on it boreh minei mezonot as a first bracha and ala mechia. I am fully aware that there are opinions, or there are some companies who've actually put the brachas differently than what I'm saying now, but we follow this ruling that you'd make on it boreh minei mezonot and ala mechia afterwards. That applies to the free, to the oat bars, crunchy bars, all these bars where the oats are not in a hole, they're not in intact shape, and they've been pressed together to form one bar or clusters or joined together. So again, if you're having loose granola and you just, with a little bit of yogurt, that you make on it boreh peri adama. But if you're having the bars which have gone through a process of steaming or heating and put together to be made lumps, then you'd make on it boreh minei mezonot. Porridge, obviously, those are rolled oats, because you use any heat to put them together, or you put them overnight that it becomes one, then you'll make on it boreh minei mezonot and ala mechia. Providing you had a kazait in a short amount of time of 4 minutes, you'd make on it ala mechia v'ala kalkala.